Who is Ly Tu Diem? Why did CEO Toan approach her? The wind carried a scent of smoke and wildflowers as Ly Tu Diem stood barefoot beside a dying fire, her eyes tracing the mountains in the distance. Her hands were calloused from days of chopping wood, her stomach empty save for the memory of half a boiled cassava. No one knew her name here. No one cared. And that was exactly how she wanted it until he came. Toan didn't look like he belonged. Crisp shirt, leather shoes that had never met mud, eyes too sharp to miss anything, yet soft when they landed on her. He stepped from his car, brushed dust from his sleeve, and asked the question she feared most. "Are you Ly Tu Diem?" She hesitated. The name was heavy, full of shame, broken promises, and the bruises of a past she wanted to bury beneath these hills. "I was," she said quietly. He didn't flinch. He only nodded as though he had expected her answer. Then, in a voice that felt too calm, too deliberate, he said, "I've been looking for you, not because of who you were, but because of what you did." What she did? Diem's heart clenched. She remembered saving a stranger in the woods weeks ago, pulling him from the river, nursing him through fever with roots and herbs she barely understood. She remembered his eyes in the firelight, the way they softened when he whispered his name through cracked lips, Toan ... She hadn't known he was a CEO. She hadn't cared. All she saw then was a man drowning in pain just like her. Now, standing in front of his sleek car and pressed collar, Diem felt the sting of suspicion. "What do you want from me?" she asked, arms folded like armor. He looked at her, not just her dirt-streaked cheeks or torn sleeves, but her, the survivor, the woman who had nothing yet gave everything. "I want to understand," he said. Why would someone with nothing risk it all to save a stranger? His question wasn't about curiosity. It was about guilt, about gratitude, about something deeper. Diem looked away. The wind blew again, carrying the scent of the mountains and something else, hope, maybe. "I didn't do it for thanks," she murmured. "I just didn't want to lose someone else." There was silence, a long one. Then he said, "Let me repay you." But repayment was not what she wanted. Trust was, safety, a place to rest without fear of being dragged back into darkness. And somehow, in that moment, with the wind whispering through the trees and his quiet presence beside her, Diem felt something shift. Maybe, just maybe, this man hadn't come to take anything from her. Maybe he had come to give. The place between fear and trust. That night, Ly Tu Diem couldn't sleep. She sat on the wooden steps of the old hut, knees pulled to her chest, listening to the chirping crickets and distant bark of a dog. Toan had offered her a ride back to the city, a place to stay, a new beginning, he said. But beginnings scared her more than endings. Inside, her few belongings were already packed in a plastic bag: some dried roots, a second-hand sweater, and a notebook with pages torn from years of hiding. She didn't know why she packed ... Maybe because, for the first time in years, someone had seen her not with pity, but with purpose. Maybe because when he looked at her, he didn't see a runaway bride or the girl from the scandal that haunted the villages. He saw someone who mattered. Toan returned at dawn. He brought warm soy milk and 2 steamed buns. He handed them over without a word, then sat beside her on the steps, not too close. Just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. She took the food with trembling hands. "Why are you really here?" she asked again, her voice barely more than breath. Toan was quiet for a long while. Then he spoke, not like a CEO giving orders, but like a man remembering how to feel. "I lost myself," he said. "Before you found me, I thought money and power would protect me. But when I was lying in that forest, half dead, it wasn't the company, the suits, or the shareholders that saved me. It was you, a stranger who had every reason to walk away, but didn't." He looked at her then, his eyes holding something raw. "I need to understand that kind of strength. I need to be around it." Diem swallowed hard. No one had ever called her strong before. They called her cursed, a burden, a shame. But this man, this polished, careful man, was unraveling in front of her, not because he needed help, but because he saw something in her he couldn't explain. She didn't know what to say, so she asked, "What happens if I say yes?" "I'll take you somewhere safe," he said. "Not to trap you, not to change you, just a place to start over. If you want." And for the first time in years, Diem realized she did want that, not a fairy tale, not a miracle, just a place to breathe, a chance to live without running. She looked at the road ahead, the rising sun, and the quiet man beside her. "Okay," she whispered. He stood, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it. And together, they walked toward a future that neither of them fully understood, but somehow it already felt like healing. A stranger in the city of glass. The car ride was silent but not uncomfortable. Ly Tu Diem sat in the passenger seat, hands resting stiffly on her knees, staring at the blurred trees racing by. Her clothes still smelled of smoke and wild earth. She could feel the city coming closer, not in sight, but in scent. The concrete, the cold. Toan kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes focused ahead, but every few minutes, he'd glance at her quietly, respectfully, as if to check she was still real, still beside him. "Are you nervous?" he asked at last. Diem didn't look at him. "I don't belong there." He didn't argue. Instead, he slowed the car slightly, as if time itself could be softened. "You're not here to belong," he said. "You're here to be safe." That word safe hung in the air like something too fragile to touch. By the time they reached the city, Diem's hands were trembling again. Skyscrapers pierced the sky like blades. The noise was overwhelming: horns, voices, neon signs blinking like 1,000 eyes. Everything moved too fast, too loud. She felt like a shadow in a world made of mirrors. Toan led her through a private entrance to a quiet apartment. No guards, no grand welcome, just soft lighting, clean floors, and the faint smell of jasmine from a nearby diffuser. "This is your room," he said, opening a door to a simple space: white curtains, a low bed, a small bookshelf. "You'll be alone here. You can lock the door if you want. No one will come in without asking." Diem nodded. Her heart pounded like a caged bird. She stepped inside, barely noticing the warmth under her bare feet. "I'll leave you to rest," he said from the doorway. But if you need anything, just call. The phone's on the table. I saved my number in it. She turned to look at him. Why are you being kind to me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, voice low. Because someone once told me that kindness without reason is the only kind that matters. Then he left, the door clicking softly behind him. Diem stood alone in the room, her bag still in her hands. She didn't unpack, she didn't cry. She just listened to the silence, to her breath, to the question still burning quietly in her chest. What did this man truly want from her? Not money, not favors, not gratitude, but something deeper. Trust, maybe, redemption, even. And yet, a part of her, the part that had survived beatings, betrayal, and abandonment, whispered, "Be careful, Dame." So she laid on the bed, fully clothed, eyes open, heart wide awake in the city of glass. And somewhere in the apartment next door, Toan stared out his own window, asking himself the same question over and over. Was this about gratitude, or was it something more? Compassion breaks barriers. When Diem saved an unconscious stranger in the forest, she didn't know he was a wealthy CEO, and she didn't care. Her instinctive act shows that kindness has no prerequisites of status, origin, or reward. Genuine compassion can reach across the widest social divide and change two lives at once. Strength often hides in silence. Diem's resilience, carrying trauma yet still able to give, illustrates that quiet endurance is not weakness. The ability to endure hardship without losing the capacity to help others is a profound form of strength that often goes unnoticed.